Live everywhere on netrootsradio.com. David Waldman, Kagro, in the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
All right, this is it. Okay, hey, how you doing, everybody? Good morning. It is Thursday, September 23rd, 2021. Time for struggling through another show. Not quite recovered at this point, but finding a new combination of over-the-counter pharmaceuticals that can help us, I think, through the day. And last-minute adjustments to the home environment here. But I moved some things around yesterday. They're not right back in the same place just yet, so everything's a little shaken up, but we should be ready to roll at this point. Justice is on the mend, so that's good news. And his mom on the mend, and that's even better news. Not that, well, let's see. It's equally good news. I don't want to disparage anybody here, but I think we're all pretty happy to hear that the treatments are working and they're on the mend and recovering, and that's great news. It's a big relief. We didn't really... we don't need any more bad news at this point. But okay, so everything seems to be on track and working, so that's good. The raft of stories are coming in, and the bus didn't arrive early like it did yesterday, which was kind of a scare. So, yeah, doing okay here. The raft of stories is growing here. Greg seems ready to start the day. What have we been noticing on Twitter this morning? I don't know. My eyes have been elsewhere. But yesterday's story collection lingers. There's still plenty to discuss here today. Anything more? I don't think so that we need. There's a little more commentary on the Eastman memo, although I think we've covered a lot of that. One of the stories we didn't get to the other day, and that we probably could have covered on Tuesday had we been on the air live, and then we should have caught up with it Wednesday, but we didn't. Some of the latest indictments that are floating around. Of course, I'd like to sort of untangle what it is that John Durham thinks he's doing with his strange indictment. The right wing, of course, insisting that this is vindication of their claim that the Trump-Russia connection was all fabricated this whole time. Everyone else, besides the extreme right, claiming this is sort of a desperation move just to prove that the investigation didn't yield nothing, but that the results might be a little bit more Whitewater-like, that they went fishing for something, couldn't find anything close to it, but came up with an infraction of another kind somewhere along the line, and went with an indictment on that. Meanwhile, at the same time, several Republican operatives indicted in what appears to be a sizable and early money laundering scheme, moving campaign donations from, well, Russian oligarchs into, well, the Trump campaign. And that would seem to undo the claim, you would think, that John Durham had blown up the whole Trump-Russia myth. So, on one way you could look at that, of course, is to say, well, both sides, and they each claim something, but I don't know. This appears to be more of a vindication of the claims that everybody made about all of this cash moving from Russian oligarchs into Trump's hands than it does that it's all made up. Of course, had it all been made up, there wouldn't be these additional indictments. So we'll try and untangle some of that, and I think that might be of some great interest. I think also in need of some untangling. What's the problem between the United States and France? We've heard smatterings of the dispute enough so that I became aware that, okay, well, it had to do with the sale of nuclear submarines to Australia. That doesn't really help me figure it out. And then it seemed to be that perhaps at bottom it was that the French thought that they had a contract to sell nuclear submarines to the Australians, but the United States swept in with, I don't know, a better deal, buy one, get one free, something like that on nuclear submarines, and snapped up the deal instead, and the French were upset about that, and I can understand being upset about it, but, not being a nuclear arms dealer, it didn't really strike me as the sort of thing that would cause a diplomatic rift, but there are some more details about that, and another interesting explanation for the blow-up that seems to have blown over since then. Emmanuel Macron and Joe Biden have been talking. Things seem to be calming down. They're speaking to one another. They'll speak again at I don't know whether it's one of the G7 or G20 summits or something like that, but we'll unravel what's going on there. The French ambassador to the United States was recalled briefly and then, I don't know, re-dispatched to the United States. He's back. I mean, it was such a short absence. I have this vision in my mind of them saying, well, we know it's going to be a short-lived thing. And so the French ambassador just puts on like Groucho Marx glasses and walks around Washington saying, I am not the French ambassador. That's not me. I don't know what you're talking about. And then a couple days later, took him off. Voila, it's me. What was that? I'm thinking of the scene from Elizabeth, right? Where the Duke of Anjou shows up. No, because I am Anjou. Anyway, not a very familiar and popular scene, I don't think. But it's a good one. Anyway, lots to catch up on there, and I thought perhaps we might unravel that. Although you may already understand it, and my head is in the clouds because of my ongoing lingering cold. But we'll see if it works out as a fun and interesting story for us to pursue. And of course, still hanging out there in the wings, something I really would like to spend a bit of time on, and we'll see how it goes today. But I said, Facebook's having a terrible week, and there's an awful lot of stories about the unraveling of, the upper echelons of Facebook. So nuclear submarines, Facebook things. Another thing I don't understand that I want to add to the pile is how teenagers are making millions of dollars on non-fungible tokens, and why I get up and do a radio show instead when we could all just learn somewhere how to do that and be millionaires. And then we could all hang out together on our private jets in the morning, and that would be that much more fun, I think, than doing things this way. All right, well, Greg Dworkin is here. I don't mean to hold you up if you were on your way to go become a millionaire with non-fungible tokens, but I suppose you could just do that in the afternoon. So good morning.
Right, I mean, it really doesn't take very long if it's going to work at all.
Like, 30 minutes or so and millions of dollars. I don't really understand.
Well, if it's virtual money, I could do it on virtual time.
I guess that's true. This Time magazine article I have, these kids, I guess they thought the same thing. This isn't real. Or their parents said, this is all bull. And then they said, well, let's go cash in some of these Ethereum coins that I got for this art. And they were like, oh, look at that. I have $30,000 in the bank. Wow. Well, I guess it's better than video games. So,
I suppose.
You
So let's talk submarines a little bit.
Good, yeah. You know something about
it? Here's a Reuters piece from yesterday, I think. And the title is, Australian documents showed French submarine project was at risk for years.
Okay. France
shouldn't have been surprised. There were major concerns about delays, cost overruns, and suitability. There's some funny things in the article. These concerns have been aired officially and publicly for years. As early as September 2018, an independent oversight board led by a former U.S. Secretary of the Navy, Donald Winter, had advised Australia to look at alternatives and question whether the project was in the national interest. It was first priced at $40 billion, more recently at $60 billion. Construction hadn't even begun. There were problems. They needed to have contingency plannings.
Screen doors.
An independent senator for South Australia, referring to France, said they would have had to have their eyes shut not to realize the danger they were facing. And government ministers said this week Canberra had been upfront with Paris about the problems. A French lawmaker also raised questions in Parliament about Australian concerns.
Okay.
And Prime Minister Scott Morrison told reporters, we chose not to go through a gate in a contract. The contract was set up that way, and we chose not to go through it because we believed to do so would ultimately not be in Australia's interest. So the idea that it was a complete shock is kind of vague there. And French officials have not disputed there were difficulties, as there might be with any big contract, But here's the funny part.
Okay.
It said Australia never suggested it wanted nuclear propulsion, even when Paris brought up the subject. It wasn't a nuclear submarine.
It wasn't. Oh.
The U.S. is offering a nuclear submarine, and France is offering a diesel submarine.
I see.
And Australia said, for this price and what's going on here, with performance and such, I'm not sure that we really want this. And I'm reading this, I'm saying, well, the French said, they never said they wanted it to go under the water. I mean, that wasn't specified anywhere.
Yeah, that's odd. I mean, that does raise questions. I would have thought that maybe the Australians were interested in non-nuclear technology, just because I think they just generally hope to keep themselves a sort of a nuclear-free zone. It's not nuclear weapons they're looking for.
It's an aggressive move by the U.S., and it involves the U.K. as the junior partner. But the UK doesn't really have much reach down there anymore. So, it's a confusing and unclear situation. But the whole idea that, this is a complete stab in the back because the US just pushed France aside. Well, according to everything I've read about it, and I'm certainly no expert, it seems like the Australians were telling the French they were having issues all along.
Yeah, maybe they just couldn't understand each other with the accents.
Right. And then they also say in June, senators, including this one here, asked panel chairman William Hilarides, a former vice admiral in the U.S. Navy. There's a lot of U.S. advice here going on. If it had advised the government to cancel the French contract, then Hilarides, who had overseen ship and submarine construction for the U.S. Navy, said the panel's advice was confidential.
All right.
And in fact, the former head of the British system, who had turned around the delayed British nuclear submarine program, joined the panel in February, contract notices show. So nobody was talking. Nobody would respond here. But it looks like the Australians are trying to get a whole bunch of people on board who were experts in this field, saying, is this going to work? Is this really a good idea? And they won't say what they said, but, watch what I do, not what I say. So apparently they had advised maybe that's not a good idea to go ahead with the French project. Okay. So there's a lot more than my feelings were hurt.
Yeah, there was definitely some of that, but okay, interesting. The twist I wasn't expecting is, that you just sort of, I'll take a nuclear submarine. You have one of those.
Yeah, French does have nuclear submarines. It's just not really clear what they ordered.
That's just so odd. Hi, I have your nuclear submarine here. I didn't know.
Right. In 2016, France was chosen over Germany and Japan to help Australia replace its older subs with 12 new diesel-electric submarines.
It runs on fromage, of course.
But, what did they want? And why did they really want it? Australia canceled this contract, and now they're going to get nuclear subs. And so, it's not like they ditched the French nuclear sub.
They ditched a French diesel sub.
Right, but in favor of a nuclear sub. Now, why did Australia want to go nuclear? That's a completely different issue. Okay. And whether or not that's arms escalation and whether it's all, about China, which it is, and whether or not that's a good idea, which is unclear, completely different discussion, which shouldn't be lost on the idea that the French are miffed.
Yes. All right. They're miffed a lot. That's a French thing. To be miffed, but okay, I am a little confused about the whole thing. Between this and, I do have another article on it. We're not going to spend all day on it, but I'll save that for later. There's some more explanation. There's a lot of, there's a lot to it, I think, that revolves around France no longer really, like the UK, no longer really finding itself a worldwide member of, the nuclear club that settles issues of arms dealing and escalation around the world. And the United States.
A lot of it has to do with the lag time that it takes to build these things. Because, we're talking 2016, 2018, it's 2021.
Yeah.
And a lot has changed in 5 years. So if 5 years ago, you were talking with the French about building a new generation of submarines for Australia, who has aging ones, and then over those 5 years, China emerges as a very aggressive nuclear superpower in that region.
Yes.
then you might want to step back and say, okay, I'm not sure if the plans we had 5 years ago really fit what we have now, particularly when they haven't even delivered it and they haven't started building it yet.
Do you have
and it's late and it costs more than they said it was going to.
Right. Where's our submarines? Don't know. We're working on them now. I said, okay, we'll be right there. Hold on.
Well, you can't see them. They're under the water.
There are still submarines, like Donald Trump says. You cannot see them.
Well, we misunderstood the contract. You wanted them down under, so we thought you wanted them on top of the water. You didn't specify that in the contract. The whole thing is wacky.
It's very
and so don't take it face value. It's all a matter of, we somehow didn't tell the French, enough in advance that this was going to happen. Seems to be a lot more nuanced and deeper than that. And I mention all of that because I don't think Joe Biden does everything correctly. He's pretty much okay on strategy. I said this the other day. Pretty bad on tactics sometimes. Mm-hmm. Okay, and yet, even though he's open and ripe for criticism, it's amazing to me how U.S. media just loves to criticize him as shallowly as possible without going into detail about any of this stuff.
Yeah,
arms buildup in the down under is a big deal, but that's not even covered. It's all about whether or not the French are miffed.
It's odd.
And Joe Biden made a mistake because anybody competent would have soothed and ruffled the French feathers before this even happened. Well, no, it's a lot more complicated than that.
In addition to which, I mean, this would be, I think, the sort of thing that Donald Trump would have been trumpeting all over the place. I undercut the French. I made an arms deal for millions of dollars in U.S. arms to be sold to the Allies in Australia that was going to go to France, and now we have it.
Right, and the U.S. media would have taken that as face value.
Yeah, right.
And there wouldn't have been that kind of critic.
They would have been angry
the
in
double
France.
Standard is just pretty apparent here. It's not the deepest, most important subject in the world.
No, even though it's very
sometimes
deep
you just
under
see
the water.
it in relief compared to what other things happen.
Okay. Well, anyway, I thought it was a little odd, and it's taking up space in the media and coloring the way other things are being covered.
For a little bit, then it'll go the way of Afghanistan.
It was
because
important
in the end,
to tell
nobody
you.
really pays attention to foreign policy unless there's a big war.
Can these boats evacuate people from Afghanistan?
Right.
No.
Can they sink? Are they supposed to? What's going on here? An
Hmm.
explainer. Here's a Vox-plainer about how submarines actually work.
Maybe that was the problem.
Maybe.
They're assuring the Australians that they are supposed to go under. That's what it. Yeah, well, they're supposed to come back out.
A little bit closer to home, Dave Weigel has a really interesting couple of tweets, not a whole tweet storm, but just 2 or 3 tweets, about what he calls the moderate paradox.
Aha. Okay.
If you attack your own party's legislation,
Kind of a paradox.
voters naturally start to think the legislation's too extreme.
Yes.
Right? And if you do that, it's a paradox because the moderates think they're doing this to help their reelection chances, but defining the party's agenda as too extreme means they're going to lose.
It could happen that way.
And remember, he says it wasn't the left that got hardest hit in 2010. It was the Blue Dogs and the New Democrats who got into messy fights about Obamacare and cap and trade. And I've always felt, and you can correct me on this because you were actually there, but I've always felt that we don't always send the best and the brightest to Congress, even on our side.
Right.
And I don't think they always understand and get what's going on here.
Well, I think that's largely true. I did see those tweets, and I thought that was a pretty good point. I mean, I know they think they're staking out independent turf by saying, I'm willing to criticize, even our side of the aisle. I'm so independent-minded. I just want what's best for America. So I don't just criticize Republicans. I sometimes, when warranted, criticize Democrats as well, but some of it is just reflexive, and they're just criticizing so that they can say that they also criticize.
Yeah, which doesn't necessarily work for them. I mean, Kristen Sinema does that. That's her thing. She thinks, she got elected, and she knows better, that Arizona, a purple state, is the place to do this. That may not work, let's say, in Berkeley, but it works in Arizona, and so she's going to go with it, and she figures whatever Democrat she loses, she'll pick up in independents because John McCain. I mean, that's her thinking. It may or may not be right. It remains to be seen. But that doesn't mean that it works everywhere else, even if it's true. If it's true.
Right. Even if it does work in Arizona. And it might not. But, yeah, big question marks for everybody else, particularly House members who have a lower profile. And, they, comparing themselves to John McCain doesn't make any particular sense. But, yes, ultimately, you find yourself being defined as a Democrat and running as a Democrat, and Republicans will be tying you to the whole party and to Nancy Pelosi. Not that that has been a terrible thing the whole time through, but if you're also insisting, no, I also believe that the Democratic agenda is too radical and foolish, then, people say, all right, but now that I've come to believe that the Democratic agenda is irrational and foolish, why do half measures? Right. I'll vote for the people who are definitely going to stop these things from happening versus you, who may or may not be able to. So, yeah, it doesn't make a great deal of sense. And I would have thought that they would have understood that early on, but they didn't. But then, as Dave points out, well, now there's objective evidence that it doesn't work. But they say, yes, but we already had this box, and this was what was in it. And I'm moderate. And the box says moderate campaign on it, Dave. I have to do this.
Right. So. And, it's very frustrating. And, hopefully some people will knock heads to get folks to at least not be so vocal about drawing lines that they cannot therefore undo because losing face and saving face and all that sort of stuff. So Biden had everybody over for a party at the White House yesterday. And he had moderates, and he had senators, and he had progressives. And Jayapal, the head of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, came out and said, look, the progressives are going to vote for both bills. And that's just the way it is. And that's because it's the Democratic agenda and it's Biden's agenda. And so we're going to vote for it. And I'm not sure what the moderates said. And, Pelosi's sticking to the idea of both bills go together.
Okay.
And what's unclear is what's going to be in the $3.5 trillion reconciliation part of it. And that's a whole lot of moving parts that still hasn't been worked out yet. But the consensus seemed to be the House does not want to be in any situation, which they've done before and they hated it. They don't want to be in a situation where they vote for what the House Democrat leadership suggests they do.
Yeah.
Then go to the Senate. Senate shoots it down, and then they're hanging on a bill that never passed, so they don't get the benefits of the bill, but their opponents use their vote for it against them. And so they're basically saying, I don't want to go anywhere unless I know the Senate's okay with this. And that means Sinema and Manchin, and that means it's going to be a more conservative, less progressive bill than you would otherwise want. And Pelosi signed off on that and said, yeah, that makes sense. We're not going to have you hang just for the sake of principle, because that does nobody any good. We need something that can pass. And that means we got to start doing the hard work of negotiating with Manchin and Sinema to see exactly what it is they want and what's the limits of what they'll vote for.
Yeah.
Because it has to pass the Senate. Kooks. And whether or not that can happen in the next few days is unclear. And so the vote might be delayed, which would be a line that for whatever reason the moderates have already drawn and said, no, we can't cross that line. It's got to be done by September 27th. And they can have everything they want, plus satisfactorily decrease the size of the reconciliation if they will wait past September 27th. So, again, it's unclear what's going on here. So Pelosi's the one that brings it to the floor, and she's the one that decides when stuff comes. And, that's the dynamic that remains to be seen. But hopefully what they said at the White House is less public talk and more private talk.
Yes, I hope so.
Do the work. Don't do the posturing.
Okay. Well, that would be wise. However, the only thing we usually see is the posturing.
Well, we just said, the people in Congress aren't always wise. They're not always the wisest people out there.
I'm tired of giving good advice and then having it, not followed because morons. But,
now,
people are eating horse paste. What am I going to tell you?
The acknowledgement needs to be, this is difficult. And whether or not you do it in August or whether or not you do it in October, it's a difficult thing to reckon with because there have to be trade-offs, and you have to decide what are the acceptable trade-offs. I mean, just for the sake of argument, what if you get a whole lot less on the human infrastructure part of it? We talked yesterday about a lot of the stuff that's in the bill, including better pay for caregivers of the elderly to keep them out of nursing homes and so on and so forth, daycare, things like that. But what if you accept less funding for that in exchange for better voting rights? That's an arguably good deal to make, but the deal has to be made and you have to get the deliverables. And yet, if that's really where all this is going, which it appears that that's where it's going, the grand bargain there, then again, you have to not lock yourself into positions that you can't back off on. Otherwise, the deal doesn't get done.
All right. I'm ready to make this deal. But yeah,
I say this as an amateur observer who doesn't know how Congress works. But, it seems to me the outlines of a deal are there.
You would think after all this time and all the fights we've had over it, the outline would be there. I guess we'll see. And then the question of whether or not, if the whole thing hinges on, you said September 27th, and it's now September 28th. So no, I don't know how that plays. Maybe there's a district that likes that.
You know my view of Congress and committee and having the gavel, right?
Sure. Yes.
I mean, Pelosi should just pass a rule that says September 27th is delayed 10 days.
Yeah. Today is
bang
September.
The gavel and say, okay, we did it on the 27th. Just our definition of the 27th.
They actually.
Well, you can't do that. Yeah, I can because I have the gavel.
They can, or we could just go with September 27th A. September 27th and a half is also a possibility, but there is a mechanism, as I recall, by which you can keep the, it's usually, I think, the Senate that works this way, and claim that it's the same calendar day. The Senate calendar is different from, like, the normal everyday calendar that we use to tell when it's Talk Like a Pirate Day or something like that. And you can keep the same legislative
Which is
day
over,
open.
by the way, it's gone.
Yes.
It was over the weekend.
I know. I was very upset about that. Plus, we had the opportunity to discuss it on Tuesday, but I was out. It was Earth, Wind, and Fire Day as well, the 21st night of September. So
here's the thing. I suggest just changing the calendar, and David points out there's a precedent for it, and there's actually a mechanism.
You can actually do that.
Welcome to Kagro X in the morning. Kagro in the morning. That's what we do. We talk about these things.
Yeah. All right. I may find a primer on that one day. Good Friday reading. All right. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Whew, okay, let's see, a nice break. Mighty OCD recommends that that at least I take cold meds more often. Is it working? I don't know. We'll see about what sort of cocktails we can put together for tomorrow morning and see if it works. I went to the antihistamines overnight.
Yeah, I mean, you can't take cold medicines more often. They'll bust you for doing meth.
Believe me, I'm aware of this. It took me like 15 minutes to get away from the pharmacy counter yesterday with a box of Claritin. Every time I go, there's a line of angry people behind me. What can I do? They make me do this in order to get allergy medication, guys, and it's Claritin. You see it on TV all the time, but I have to wait here. Well, they write down my license number and the serial number of the box I'm buying, and like, oh my God, the things I have to do. Meanwhile, I could have sold nuclear submarines in that time, or a non-fungible token, and it would all be, why don't I just do it that way?
That's okay, yeah. But you got to do it with a French accent. So, John Tester.
Yes.
You may have heard of him.
Yes.
Is a Democrat, and he's from a red state. Right. And he's talking about the shutdown as they try to avoid a shutdown, as the GOP picks a debt fight, as Politico puts it. In other words, the GOP is not going to cooperate whatsoever. They would rather the U.S. completely go into default and ruin the economy because that way they own the libs. Yes, and Tester says, this is ridiculous. We always do this effing dance, except he uses the F word. Oh, wow. This is just a ridiculous exercise. I can't even compare it to anything I do on the farm that's this stupid. And of course, he's right. And people were writing on Twitter, you see, Tester is a red state Democrat. And, just like Joe Manchin, and Tester gets it. And why can't Manchin be more like Tester? They're both red state Democrats, and Tester has figured out a way to survive. So what's with Manchin?
He's a farmer.
And I read that, different. And I said, look, I mean, that's like saying these two guys are both from New Jersey. Why aren't they exactly alike? Because different people are different. Hey, well, these two guys, they work for the same company. How come they're not exactly alike? Because different people are different. You could put Manchin where Tester is and Tester where Manchin is, and Manchin would still be Manchin. I mean, it's just the way he is.
Yes, probably true. I don't know if it would work in getting him elected to Montana.
Oh, he probably wouldn't get elected, but he'd still be the same person. He'd still have the same views.
Well, maybe. Unless he just really, really, really wanted to be in the Senate. That's all he was about. What do you want to do there? Nothing. So. I just want to be there.
He's been governor. He's done this. He's done that. Okay. At his age, he's kind of set in his ways. And expecting him to be different somehow is a complete and total waste of time. So you got to work with him. Work with him.
Could we hypnotize him?
I don't know.
No one has thought of that.
I just imagine all these Wile E. Coyote schemes with Acme hypnotist book, trying to make Manchin different.
Right.
And Manchin just sticking his tongue out at you and then just dashing off.
Right. You put out a plate of with a sign that says "Free coal."
Something like that.
I don't know.
But, I just don't know how well it would work. So other big stories, just don't forget this part. As the January 6th committee
yes, right. Okay.
Continues with subpoenas or a threat to subpoena, Kurt Bardella has a piece in USA Today. Trump-fueled violence is not over. Now is not the time to let our guard down. Although the Justice for J6 rally avoided violence, and by the way, I would add a complete total bust, we can't let our guard down and assume that the worst is behind us. And, the more you find out about how intricate, we talked yesterday about the Eastman memo, how intricate the planning was for January 6th. I think Jamie Raskin said, look, the reason things are taking so long is this is like one of the biggest crimes in America, and in American history, it just takes a long time to untangle. So give us time, and we're working on it.
I don't feel like they've been working all that long on it. I think the committee was a long time in getting started, but
right, but why isn't it done yet?
I don't know.
Mona Charen, of all people, very conservative writer, writing in the Bulwark, why I'm a single-issue voter. I'll vote against the party threatening the republic. Simple as that. So it's interesting because for the never-Trumpers, who are a really small part of the overall Republican coalition, those who have stayed, those who have left, do have one issue, and that's democracy. It happens to be an issue we agree with, so they'll vote with us on that. But Democrats won't vote on one issue. And that's why this moderate progressive spat is so harmful to the Democratic brand, as we talked about at the very beginning, as Weigel points out. When moderates start smearing what the Democrats are doing, they just convince independents that the Democrats are too radical. And independents don't have a laser focus on democracy the way the never-Trumpers do, which is admirable. But you have to, on the never-Trumpers part, but you have to recognize they don't represent independents. And so you got to do it better in order to get votes. So, to me, the big issue is not, you just focus on your commitment to democracy and that'll win you the 2022 midterms. I don't think so. I think the pandemic is the big issue. I don't think that single voter issues on democracy are going to be the ones that decide it. So in that regard,
though it will help us decide it, but yeah.
Well, but in that regard, I think that getting the pandemic under better control is still issue number one.
It has to be, and it's pretty clearly an overwhelmingly popular issue. Or that is to say, it's popular to actively and realistically fight the virus.
Yeah, being anti-COVID is more popular than being pro-COVID.
Right. Yes.
And Mississippi, Florida, and Texas governors, regardless, they're going to, I think, find out that it doesn't help them. It hasn't helped Abbott's numbers. It hasn't helped DeSantis's numbers. Nobody really cares what Tate Reeves' numbers are in Mississippi. Mississippi's, as you know, into lost causes. And we appreciate the fact that there are many, many, many Democrats in Mississippi fighting to make things better. And that's also true in Florida and in Texas. And so when I say disparaging things about the governors, I mean the governors,
right,
not the people.
Yep, the long-suffering Democrats in those states. The odds are you'll continue to suffer because of the way they run things down there.
Yeah, Texas seems closest to making a change, but I don't know if they're quite there yet. I think they got another 5 years worth of work to do. I'm not a big fan of Beto running. Mm-hmm. I think somebody else should.
Oh.
But I think that, Abbott is perhaps beatable. But the problem with Beto, I think, is when he first ran, he was a unifier. I don't think he can claim to be that now, not in this environment. So I think some of his appeal is not going to be the same. And, lightning doesn't always strike twice. Or you can't catch lightning in a bottle twice, or whatever analogy and metaphor you like to use. Bromide, I just don't know. So we'll have to see. Speaking of the pandemic, really interesting article by Jay Varma, who's a ID and public health doc I follow on Twitter and who follows me, good guy, has an article in The Atlantic that says this: not every question has a scientific answer. The toughest COVID policy questions are matters for politicians, not health experts, to decide. And he gives an example, the booster thing. When President Joe Biden announced last month that the U.S. would offer a third vaccine dose to Americans who had already received 2 doses of Pfizer or Moderna, he exposed the divide between an administration that's pledged to follow the science and many prominent health experts who disagreed with the decision. I, Jay Varma, am a physician and public health professional specializing in infectious diseases, and I can think of many potential scientific, regulatory, logistical, and ethical objections to Biden's announcement.
Okay, go ahead.
But this was not fundamentally a question for science. It was a question for democracy. Given that elected officials' primary obligation is to protect the safety of their constituents, Biden made a rational judgment when presented with evidence that a third dose might provide additional protection, and that the U.S. has sufficient capacity to supply and deliver the third dose.
Okay.
So, he's all for that decision, even though he can find objections to it. And that's what I mean about nuance and that sort of thing being totally acceptable to the science community. I don't think you should do that. Well, I have reasons for it. Okay, I get that. Well, that's not how it's covered. Basic objections were raised to Biden's agenda, questioning the whole thing and casting a shadow on everything. Well, look, these are all trade-offs. And when you present it like that, you do the public a disservice, but that's our media because that's what sells. On social media and in interviews with reporters, though, many experts argued the administration should wait for more data. When politicians and scientific experts come to different conclusions about how to protect public health, no one should categorically assume the latter, the scientists, are right and the former are wrong. They have very different obligations. That's why I said the other day when we were talking about this, that what you're looking at with this sort of argument is exactly how task forces in the White House go when they try to decide policy. You have the science side, then you have the politician side, and you got to meld them and then come to a consensus because they're very different ways of looking at it, and one isn't more right or more wrong than the other, although in a particular case one might be completely wrong. But, they each have merit. They each have something to say.
True.
So some of these health experts, Jay writes, have been quick to criticize individuals who offer opinions about COVID-19 matters despite having no health training or experience. For many scientists in my Twitter feed, for example, the statistician and political forecaster Nate Silver's comments are a consistent source of ire. The term epistemic trespassing, originally coined by the philosopher Nathan Ballantyne, has gained currency among physicians and scientists who believe that economists, data scientists, engineers, and other public commenters should show humility and self-awareness when making recommendations outside their domain-specific knowledge. But many physicians and scientists appear unaware of their own epistemic trespassing. Medicine, epidemiology, and virology. And by the way, they're right about that. And what's striking about it is that the economists and the data scientists in particular, and the engineers, and I went to an engineering school, I get this, are incredibly arrogant about I'm right, you don't understand the numbers. And, people are not numbers, my friend.
That's true. I have, I got a lot of training in that stuff too. I also went to a school that had a large engineering program, but I also have been through law school, wherein, of course, they teach you in a little bit of dealing about medical malpractice law, and saying one of the most dangerous aspects of doing it is both the lawyer and client are both trained to think they're absolutely right in every situation. And it's important that everyone know that.
Well, you could add engineers to that,
Yeah.
Yet many physicians and scientists appear unaware of their own epistemic trespassing. Medicine, epidemiology, and virology are scientific disciplines fundamental to the control and prevention of infectious disease.
Yes.
Using epidemiology, for example, you can try to calculate how severe a burden of disease imposes and how well any proposed intervention will ease that burden. But the practice of public health involves using that information to improve the health within a specific jurisdiction, accounting for the legal, economic, and political conditions. So public health practitioners can't just follow the science. They have to account for other factors: legality, cost, feasibility, social acceptability. And in the U.S., public health practice must account for laws and cultural norms that limit the power of government and strongly favor protection of individual rights over collective rights. And I would add, in the U.S., public health practice at the federal level has to account for 50-plus states that all do it differently. And have different levels of competence and investment in their public health structures. So what works in New York may not work in Mississippi, and vice versa.
Also true. Yeah.
In any democratic jurisdiction, legal and economic factors, along with the opinion of powerful interest groups, may trump scientific evidence.
It can happen. Yeah.
Right. So you got to take all of that into account, and so it's not easy. And on many issues, no gap exists between following the science and the everyday practice of public health, but, sometimes it does. And when that happens, what do you do? So, it's a pretty good article, and I think that emphasizes the fact that Biden's right to say, okay, we have this, we have different varying advice. I put it together. I'm the decision maker. The buck stops here. I'm the decider. W made that famous.
Yes.
And so you do it. You make a decision. And that's okay. My perspective is you should do that. Just be more upfront and transparent about what you're doing. I'm getting different advice, and despite the fact that some may think that we should wait on this, I think it's in the best interest of the country to do this. If you say that, and then somebody else later says, wait, I think you should wait, Biden says, I had that covered. I already told you that.
Yeah. I understood your point, and I considered it.
I understood your point. I even referred to it.
Yeah.
I was thinking of people like you when I said that.
You may have missed my speech. Yeah.
But we're doing it anyway.
Well, I can understand that. I mean, for one thing, severe shortage of gavels among scientists. There is that problem. That's how those decisions are going to get made. And scientists also I guess they need to recognize they are but one input into the system here. And
so
the deciders
he
have gavels.
Changes the equation from you should follow the science to start with the science and then let democracy decide.
That makes good sense, and it's good to have that out there. I mean, there'll be a lot of people for whom that doesn't sink in. You said follow the science, and now you're not following the science.
And I found this one paper, which is a preprint that hasn't been peer-reviewed, that has flaws in it, that says what I already agreed with, and why aren't you following the science?
Yeah.
If you spend any time on Twitter, you get that like every day.
Yes, you would.
And the answer is there's a bigger picture here.
The science says don't eat horse paste, but people are doing it. Now, it doesn't mean you have to allow for it politically. But
well, I found this one paper where and this one doctor who argues that you should do this.
Yeah. Well,
so you're not following the science. Well, actually, I'm following the scientific consensus here.
Right. There we go. If you follow every bit of science, you just run in circles.
Right. So, again, I think that's an important perspective and worth looking at. And again, people will say, well, you can't do nuance. Well, you can't do nuance because you've given up on nuance. If you already give it up at the beginning, then you can't go do it later. But if you start with nuance, you get to continue. It's okay to say we don't know everything. It's a new virus. It's a novel virus. We're learning as we go. But here's what we know so far, and this is why we're doing this.
How come nobody said that?
I don't know. It's not that hard.
Said you should say these things this way.
Here's an example.
Oh, the people who had the book threw it out. That's right. I forgot.
Right.
Yes.
They threw out, exactly. It was all written and they threw that out. So here's an example. And we talked about this on the show. We have personal investiture in this.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say, for the sake of argument, theoretically, somebody gets a J&J vaccine.
Yes.
And then we find out boosters are being suggested.
They are.
Okay. And the reason is that the original vaccine is still pretty good at keeping you out of the hospital and preventing you from dying, which is the major endpoint we were looking at. It's unclear whether it also continues to protect you against getting infected, which isn't as important to the public health people trying to preserve the hospital, but is important to you, the public, because that's really what you care about. You don't want your kids going to school getting infected by a teacher who got J&J. So whether or not you should get a second shot, well, it does seem like a second shot's better than one shot. So far, so good. That's the science. Now,
yes,
that second shot,
the whole idea was
should you get a Pfizer shot? Because it's available, because it's fully approved,
right.
And FDA says that's fine. But the official recommendation is to get a second J&J, and that's not available yet. So if it's available, should you just go ahead and get the Pfizer? Or should you get a Moderna? Because Pfizer and Moderna are mRNA vaccines that work differently, and it appears J&J followed by a mRNA vaccine may be better, and we don't know that for sure, but AstraZeneca plus an mRNA appears to show that data from England. So should you go ahead and do that, even though the studies haven't been fully vetted and you're not really totally sure about increased side effects from myocarditis if you're a young man, but should you just go ahead and do that? Or should you just wait and get a second J&J, right? And the answer is yes.
Aha.
Any of those things is okay, probably. And if a politician said, I follow the science, but the science stops here, we have to make a decision based on inadequate information and what we know. And so I'm saying just get anything. Anything's better than nothing. And there's data backing that up, even though we don't have complete information on all of it. It's not a terrible thing for a politician to say, but a scientist and public health person can't necessarily make that decision because given their training, they're going to have to say, we don't know enough yet, and we're going to have to wait. And the politician will say, well, the public doesn't want to wait. The public wants to have a good Thanksgiving with crusty old Uncle Joe who isn't vaccinated. And so everybody else needs to be vaccinated. And so, just go ahead and do this. And that's an example of how the politicians may overrule the public health people. And that's not all bad.
Not all.
What are you going to do? You have to make a decision based on the information you have. Is there any real reason why you shouldn't? And people are doing this, whether they're lying about it or getting the doctor to write a note. People are getting a booster, whether they're eligible by FDA rules or not. And is that terrible? Or should we just acknowledge that that's what people want and there's really no horrible reason not to do it so long as we have enough?
Okay, I'm for that.
That's a politician's decision. That's not a public health decision.
Yes, and both two good points made in there. Not only do they have different priorities, politicians and scientists, but also that I guess one of the reasons that they have different priorities, I don't know whether scientists would necessarily consider themselves advocates for the health of the entire world versus somebody who says, I am chiefly concerned with health outcomes in this district here that votes.
Those are the ethical issues that Jay Varma brought up.
Yes.
And I can have some ethical questions about the booster, but on the whole, this is I acknowledge that this is a decision for a politician to make.
Yes. All those gavels. You can't just walk around in a white coat and start injecting people.
Right. So I just thought that was an interesting food for thought that people should keep in mind as we see this debate play out.
All right. Then we'll do that.
And the final piece I have before I go is winter is coming again. What to expect from COVID-19 as the season looms. This is from Helen Branswell on September 20th. Winter is coming again. We talked about this a little bit, but I think it's good to go over just briefly because we do have more information that, in fact, the current wave is, in fact, receding. The number of cases around the country is definitely going down.
All right.
The number of deaths, because it's lagging, isn't necessarily yet, Florida in particular. But
Alabama in particular.
As things go down and things get better by November, as many of the models suggest, we'll have some hard decisions to make, because now is the time to make them about boosters. So that concept of the current peak starting to drop fits in very well with, okay, so now we have to make a decision about what we do about boosters. We have some time, because as the numbers drop before we get to the next wave, whenever that is, whether it's sparked by Thanksgiving or Christmas travel or whatever, now is the time to make those decisions so we can get the practical aspects of rolling this stuff out. Who's going to do it? Is it going to be, what about 5 to 11-year-olds? Who's going to be giving those? And how is that going to be done? So there's a lot of work to do now. That's where the public health people really should come in. But it's the politicians who have to make the ultimate decisions about, look, we're recommending that we wait for not longer than a month. And at that point, we're going to hear about 5 to 11-year-old vaccinations. Then we will make a firm recommendation, which is subject to change. And at the same time, for everybody else, here's our recommendation. So, yeah, you can go ahead and get it. If you're over 65, you can get Pfizer. And we're coming very soon with what to do about J&J and Moderna. And that's what to expect in the next couple of weeks.
All right. Just hang in there and keep your mask on, I guess.
Right. And if you went ahead and somehow snuck in a Pfizer vaccine, even though you're Team Moderna, or even though you had gotten the J&J, it's not the end of the world.
Right. Well, can't undo it anyway, so don't worry about it too much.
Right.
Plus, it might be good. All right. Mm-hmm. Well, we'll see whether this decline holds up. As you mentioned, the lagging indicator of the deaths will be with us for some time. I mentioned Alabama. I'm wondering about their stats, but they're creeping up in the numbers consistently in the deaths per million, but they're consistently on the low end in terms of new cases, and it's been that way for a long time. And I'm wondering, I'm not certain I can explain it exactly, but they have one of the lowest rates of increase in new cases daily, but the highest rate of increase of new deaths reported daily. But I mean, it's been going on for long enough that lag doesn't seem to explain it. I'm wondering whether they're not really reporting the right number of new cases, but they can't hide the deaths, or what. But Alabama's got a very weird case going on, and they, like Mississippi, have shot to the top of the charts. Mississippi passing New Jersey as the hardest hit state per capita in terms of deaths. Louisiana about to overtake the number 2 spot and pass New Jersey as well.
Right, although things are definitely getting better in Louisiana. That's one of the places you can see the hospitalizations drop, the cases drop, deaths to come.
Yeah, and where winter is coming, we see up north where it's already cold. I do see the news that Alaska now joins Idaho in implementing emergency triage proceedings or procedures all over the state. Crisis standards of care adopted statewide now in Alaska, joining Idaho. So maybe where winter has already come, we're beginning to see what the winter will look like. Even if case numbers are dropping or new infections are dropping, that doesn't necessarily help when you're talking about hospitals with 6 ICU beds.
Right. I mean, part of the problem in Alaska, of course, it's a vast state with not that many people, and the hospital capacity is really physically, geographically stretched. And, you got to transport sometimes in very bad weather in winter. So, it all makes it a lot more complicated.
All right. Well, hang in there, Alaska. What can I say? All right. Thanks, Greg. That brings us almost to the hour.
And that makes it
legal
for the week for me
to leave if you need to. Yes, right.
Yeah.
True.
And but I'll be back on Monday.
Okay.
And
bring a
the funny thing is, this is really for those of you who don't know, this is not a scripted show in any way, shape, or form. I get up in the morning, and for my segment that David allows me to do, I try to figure out what articles I find interesting. So these are things that are of interest to me. That doesn't make them of interest to you. We should show a little humility here. But I thought today's show was interesting.
I think so, too. And on another note...
Oh, my fucking God, get the fucking vaccine already, you fucking fucks. Just that, too.
Need to get that in there every day so that you get your vaccines. All right, I appreciate, it is unscripted. And sometimes even the script that we cobble together doesn't work. Very often I have a list of articles that you planned to do, and we don't always get them all. And I have to double check. We didn't talk about this yet, did we? No? Right. Okay.
Or we talked about this one twice, but that's okay.
Yeah.
It was a good one.
Very important. Right. It's important to get to these things. All right. Great. Thanks.
All right. Take care, and I'll talk to you on Monday.
Scan the list. Okay. Well, we'll do that. And I'll hang in there and take some more over-the-counter drugs, and hopefully maybe we can make a really interesting show out of it tomorrow. I still have my concerns about whether I can make it all the way through. Maybe I should record some segments of the show for tomorrow so I could play a pre-recorded discussion of an article and take a 20-minute break in the middle of it. That might be... we'll see if we can make it work. I don't know. An experiment. All right, I think we actually hit most of the items on today's list. That's not always the case. Speaking of the states in big trouble, Mighty OCD chiming in again, just letting everybody know. Tennessee is among those states running into these, having these drastic problems. I think he meant to see it mentioned among Greg's collection of Florida and Texas under Abbott and DeSantis, and Mississippi under Tate Reeves. Same problem. It's Bill Lee, isn't it? Governor of Tennessee. And Tennessee, I think we've mentioned before, has, in fact, shot to the top of the list in terms of, I think, the number of infections, number of cases per million, now occupying the first spot and really running away with it, having left all close competition in the dust and just accumulating cases hand over fist. So definitely some weird things happening in the Deep South, and with Mississippi and Louisiana poised now within the next week or so to occupy the first and second spots in deaths per capita, people are going to start thinking that the Delta virus means the Mississippi Delta rather than whatever. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Lots to get to, lots still happening, many items flying by on the screen and grabbing my interest, like the online meme of the boyfriend with the wandering eye. I was thinking at the beginning of the show we could make one with it being Australia looking at the American nuclear submarines and the outraged French diesel submarine to his right. You get the idea. I think you know the meme. I feel like now maybe we have to deliver on that promise of the other article about this situation, even though it's a big shift in gears, but we'll just run the first hour over again and do the same issues in the same order. How about that? But with a different perspective. So this article that I grabbed that I thought was of some interest, just explaining perhaps some of the nuance in this submarine situation. An opinion guest essay in the New York Times from yesterday by Sylvie Kaufman. Ms. Kaufman, she is identified in the little blurb here at the top of the article, is editorial director of Le Monde, and writes extensively about European and international politics. So there you go. She's Frenchified and has Frenchified bona fides, I guess, and explains, no wonder the French are angry, and probably residual anger about freedom fries playing a small part in this, but there's real reasons too. Make no mistake, she begins, this is a crisis, not a spat. Which is interesting because, of course, the American reaction to most of this news has been, oh, this isn't a crisis, this is a spat. So, what's going on? The new partnership announced last week between the United States, Britain, and Australia, I keep missing the British part in all of this, in which Australia would be endowed with nuclear-powered submarines, has left the French angry and in shock, and not just because of the loss of their own deal signed in 2016 to provide Australia with submarines. But as Greg explained, the deal was signed in 2016, and, where's our submarines? They might be asking. It's been quite a long time. French officials say they have been stonewalled and duped by close allies. This is how they feel about this whole thing, who negotiated behind their backs. The sense of betrayal is so acute that President Emmanuel Macron has uncharacteristically opted to keep silent on the issue, delegating the expression of a very public rage to his otherwise quiet foreign minister, Jean-Yves Le Drian. How's that for pronunciation? I think the pronunciation gets better if you're congested. It forces you into better French pronunciation. Although maybe that was worse. I don't know. I was careful with that one because it looked like his name is Le Drain. No, the I comes before the A. Drian, I guess, is probably what they mean. Anyway, asked on public television whether President Biden's behavior was reminiscent of his predecessors, Monsieur Le Drian replied, without the tweets. And indeed, I do think that, I think that that's something that Trump would have been very proud of and would have been talking about everywhere he went, that he undercut the French and sold American arms where French arms were, previously contracted for. And so, yeah, in a sense, that is a little Trumpian, although I don't know that I would necessarily say that Biden's behavior was Trumpian. That doesn't really strike me as true. But if you got the raw end of this deal, I suppose you're going to say anything. All right. Well, and again, also a lot of the article that Greg brought to our attention calls into question the reality of these claims that the negotiations were done behind French backs. The fallout is about much more than a scrapped business deal. Gallic pride and bruised egos. There's some of that in this as well. This diplomatic bombshell has crudely exposed the unwritten rules of great power competition. This is at the heart of the problem. France still considers itself a great power. And, to some extent, the ability of the United States to continue to consider itself as a great power when we're dying of COVID left and right is also up in the air. Plus, having alienated all of our allies over the past 4 years. But, this begins to explain some of it. For younger people, and really younger than like 50 or so, you don't have to be that young anymore. The idea of France as an international great power isn't really relevant. It's not top of mind. But, it would bring to mind your studying of international history post-World War II, perhaps. That, or for instance, if you were learning about the structure of the United Nations and permanent members of the UN Security Council, and you might say to yourself, what are some of these countries doing here? And unless you knew the post-war history, it wouldn't make any sense. France, for better or for worse, probably hasn't been, well, certainly in this country, although I guess in this country we don't regard anybody as a great power anymore except for ourselves. But it's been a diminishing power, along with Britain, along with, it used to be the bipolar superpower world, and the collapse of the Soviet Union has done away with that. But we are all familiar in more recent times with how that has affected the Russian psyche and the Russian government's activities after their downgrading, I guess, from superpower status. Anyway, let me continue along with this article. Much better organization of thought than I'm able to do on cold meds anyway. So again, the fallout is about much more than this scrapped business deal, Gallic pride, and bruised egos. The diplomatic bombshell, right, crudely exposed the unwritten rules of great power competition in which France cannot be a player unless it carries the weight of the European Union behind it. The past week has been about 21st century geopolitics and the brutal adjustment of old alliances to new realities. France considers itself a resident power in the Indo-Pacific region, and I don't know that most Americans would think that. It's a crucial battleground, of course, for the rivalry between America and China, because it possesses several islands and maintains 4 naval bases there. That is to say, the French do. France considers itself a resident power in this crucial battleground between the United States and China because it possesses several islands and maintains 4 naval bases there. It developed its own strategy for the region in 2018. Everyone must eat cheese, for instance. And has been pushing since then for the European Union to come up with a similar project. Ironically, the European Union's Indo-Pacific strategy was presented on the very day of the deal, known as AUKUS, that's A-U-K-U-S, Australia, UK, US, perhaps. It was presented on the very day that the deal, known as AUKUS, became public. The plan was, of course, drowned out by the uproar. Australia, was key to the French strategy. Beyond the sale of submarines, France foresaw a partnership with Australia that would add an important pillar to its presence in the region. Now the whole plan is in shambles. In the French view, the new program set up by the Americans in Australia is so enormous, encompassing cybersecurity and intelligence, that it doesn't leave any room for any other initiative. To rebuild its regional strategy, France is now turning to India, with which it already cooperates closely. At work here is a realignment of alliances in the region, rammed through by the United States with as much consideration for its allies as it showed in the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. The world order is mutating, alliances multiplying. The Anglosphere, tightened around the Five Eyes intelligence sharing network, comprising Canada, America, Britain, Australia, and New Zealand, right? Trying to give everybody their chance at their accents, is regrouping in the South Pacific. That leaves no space for continental Europeans, even though they have common interests. It feels like a long time since Mr. Biden's warm family reunion with his European allies at NATO headquarters in Brussels in June. I've already forgotten about it. Then, at Mr. Biden's urging, leaders were uniting in declaring China a security risk, even though France and Germany objected that China was not part of the organization's remit. That's true. North Atlantic, no China, right? Now, in the interests of countering that challenge, France has been cast aside. The French don't suspect the Biden administration of deliberately maneuvering to divide Europe, former President Donald Trump's old trick, but they fault the new administration for misjudging the impact of its heavy-handed policy. American leadership, a French diplomat told me, is different from partnership. In Five Eyes, for example, there is one leader. The others are just junior partners. This raises many difficult questions for Europe. On Monday, the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, told CNN that the way France had been treated was, quote, not acceptable. But the reluctance of some European leaders to react publicly to the crisis reflects their uncertainty about how to deal with the United States and China. As tensions between the two powers continue to rise, European leaders might not have the luxury of ambivalence for very long. The United States also has questions to answer. Does partnering with post-Brexit Britain in this delicate phase of its relationship with the European Union and humiliating the French contribute to the stability of Europe and the unity of the West? If Washington really wants its European allies to take charge of their neighborhood, is it ready to accept the concept of European sovereignty, including in defense procurement? And what does it want for the future of NATO? Sensing growing doubts among some of their EU partners about America's commitment, the French will now try to push for a more autonomous and more sovereign Europe with increased capacities to act both militarily and diplomatically. but the illusion that the French could be America's partner in a more balanced relationship under a Biden administration, allied but not aligned, is probably lost. The Anglosphere has a colorful expression for this illusion: punching above one's weight. Tellingly, it does not translate easily into French. That's an interesting conclusion. And I think some important nuance in coming to understand why the French, for instance, might think that this was such a big deal and insist that this was a major crisis, whereas in the United States it seemed to be dismissed as little more than the spat that was mentioned at the top. All right, I hope that gives you some better understanding of what's going on here. We can move on to a couple other items, including the recent indictments of some Republican operatives for laundering of Russian campaign cash, but also try and catch up on the John Durham situation. What do we go with first? Oh, I don't know. It feels like it would be more fun to talk about the Republicans being charged here. I'll begin then with this Politico article from, probably about a week ago. Let's see. September 20th. So not that long ago, actually. Just 3 days ago. I thought it was older, but I guess not. Longtime GOP operatives charged with funneling Russian nationals' money, one Russian nationals anyway, to Trump and the RNC. Who are we talking about? Jesse Benton and Doug, is it Weed? Like it's W-E-A-D. Is it pronounced like W-E-E-D? I don't know. Could it be Wade? I don't really know. Anyway, they pleaded not guilty, if that matters, to 6 felony charges, including facilitating a campaign contribution by a foreign national, which is a no-no. Josh Gerstein and Kyle Cheney reported this for Politico. 2 veteran Republican campaign operatives, including one who got a pardon from then-President Donald Trump 1 month before he left office, that's important, are charged in a new federal indictment with funneling $25,000 from a Russian national into the Trump campaign in 2016. Didn't get a pardon for that. Jesse Benton, 43, by the way, and Doug Wade, I don't know, he's 75, made brief appearances Monday at a video hearing in U.S. District Court in Washington, pleading not guilty to 6 felony charges, including facilitating a campaign contribution by a foreign national, acting as a straw donor. I'm sorry, I missed my chance to say.
Acting!
Yes. Acting like as a straw donor, and causing the filing of false campaign finance reports. The grand jury indictment alleges that Benton and Weed worked together to accept $100,000 from an unidentified, well, to us anyway, although I think everybody has some guesses as to which oligarch it might be, an unidentified Russian national in order to get the foreigner a meeting with then-candidate Trump at a fundraiser in Philadelphia on September 22nd, 2016. So what are we talking about? 5 years ago. Almost exactly to the day. Neither Trump nor his campaign are mentioned by name in the indictment. Oh, he's just individual one again. But details in the 19-page document make clear that the scheme involved seeking the donation in connection with the Trump event and an opportunity to get face-to-face with him. Which, ugh. But anyway. For example, the indictment's reference to a $25,000 donation on October 27, 2016, to a political committee by Benton, allegedly to cover up the foreign source of the money, lines up with a donation of the same size and date to Trump's political committee attributed to a Jesse Bentor, not Benton, which prosecutors said is a garbling of Benton's name. There is no indication in the indictment that Trump or his campaign aides were aware that the money originated with the Russian donor. The charges say that Benton and Wade concealed the arrangement from Trump and that part of the scheme involved getting the political committees to unwittingly file reports indicating that Benton was actually the source of the funds. The indictment suggests that Benton and Wade hoped to make money from the scheme and did, taking $100,000 from the Russian, but paying only $25,000 to Trump Victory, a joint venture between the Trump campaign and the Republican National Committee. Benton, a veteran of Kentucky and presidential politics. Is there anybody in Kentucky who's Republican at a high level about whom we might have suspicions or reason to distrust them? Benton, a veteran of Kentucky and presidential politics, had previously faced federal campaign finance charges for payments to a key Iowa state lawmaker who switched endorsements from Michelle Bachmann to Ron Paul in the 2012 presidential primary. Do you even remember that? That sort of rings a bell. Trump, just before leaving office, pardoned Benton for the crimes he was convicted of. I guess those. Benton is also an in-law and former advisor to Senator Rand Paul, who is, of course, Ron Paul's son. Benton previously led Senator Mitch McConnell's 2014 re-election campaign before stepping down amid legal scrutiny. So both the Kentucky senators wrapped up in this one. In pardoning Benton and another associate, Trump indicated that the move had the support of Rand Paul and former FEC chair Lee Goodman. The new indictment alleges that Benton was carrying out the foreign donation scheme in the days just before and after he was sentenced to 2 years probation on the Iowa-related campaign finance case. That guy can't stop criming. Wade is a conservative commentator and activist who co-authored a book with then Vice President George H.W. Bush, published just before Bush became president in 1989. Wade also enjoyed close access to the Trump White House during his presidency. Wade is represented in the case by two former attorneys for Trump when he was president, Jay Sekulow and Jane Raskin. Asked about the charges, Sekulow said in a statement, "Doug Wade is a respected author and supporter of charitable causes. He has pleaded not guilty to the charges and will continue to respond appropriately in court." Charitable causes, that's nice. The case against Benton and Wade has been assigned to Judge Trevor McFadden, a Trump appointee. So we'll see how that comes out in court. But that's the basics of the charge. I thought we should catch up on those things. And I think I have some additional information on that through Talking Points memo, something that they put out just yesterday. It's been 5 years since Russian cash was allegedly funneled into the Trump campaign. Why wasn't it charged until now? And it's illustrated with a photo of Jesse Benton standing with Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell in 2013. In the photo, Jesse is comically holding his nose as I guess to illustrate the, well, hold your nose and vote for McConnell sort of thing, I guess, in terms of what? Was he facing a primary challenge at the time from the right, perhaps? Anyway, Josh Kovensky reports this for TPM. Imagine for a moment if it had come out during the 2016 campaign or in the first year of the Trump presidency that GOP political operatives were accused of illegally funneling Russian money into the Trump campaign. I feel like we lived through that, actually. Now, some 5 years later, except we didn't get the charges then. Some 5 years later, that's precisely the accusation federal prosecutors are making in a new case in D.C. What took so long? According to an indictment unsealed on Monday in D.C. federal court, a pair of GOP operatives allegedly conspired to conceal their scheme and siphon thousands of dollars from illegal foreign money from a Russian businessman, a legitimate businessman, into Trump campaign coffers. All this took place as the national media and FBI scoured the Trump campaign for any potential source of Russian ties, or more importantly, infusions of Russian cash. Allegations like these would have been explosive and politically damaging to Trump. But now, 5 years since some of the alleged crimes took place, the Justice Department decided to charge the case. Well, one of the problems, of course, in the intervening 4 years was Trump was in charge of the Department of Justice, so unlikely to see those charges brought up. Former prosecutors and campaign finance experts told TPM that the delay was unusual. It seems like the kind of case that doesn't require 5 years of investigation, Barb McQuaid, former U.S. attorney, told TPM, adding that the allegations themselves didn't suggest the kind of complicated financial dealings that may require years of probing to unspool. It seems like the transactions were finite and complete by, at the latest, early 2017. So it's a fair question why someone did not charge this, she added. When you're dealing with high-profile people in a case like this, then it's justified to be more suspicious of the timing, Larry Noble, a former FEC commissioner, told TPM. The indictment itself says that Jesse Benton, a Kentucky GOP operative who helmed Senator Mitch McConnell's 2014 re-election campaign and who has worked closely with Senator Rand Paul, acted as a straw donor to siphon $25,000 into Trump Victory, a PAC formed by the RNC and the Trump 2016 presidential campaign. Benton, who was later pardoned by Trump for his conviction in an unrelated campaign finance scheme, the Iowa one, allegedly plied his connections to secure a photo op between Trump and a Russian businessman in Philadelphia on September 22, 2016, if that's all it was. Prosecutors said that Doug Wade, a conservative author, helped Benton do that and introduced him to the Russian. The person was allegedly a business partner of Wade's and was the source of the contributions. Prosecutors are silent on the identity of the Russian businessman, saying only that he was a business partner of Wade's. The Russian allegedly wired $100,000 from a Vienna bank account in September of 2016, $25,000 of which Benton allegedly spent on a contribution to the Trump campaign in October of 2016. Benton pocketed the remaining $75,000, the indictment alleged. Doesn't look good. It's not clear why the charges in this case came 5 years after the conduct occurred. Oh, isn't it? Attorney General Merrick Garland said in June of 2021 that Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco was reviewing, quote, potentially problematic matters deserving high-level review. TPM asked a DOJ spokesperson whether the Benton and Wade indictment was a matter subject to Monaco's review. The spokesperson declined to comment. McQuaid, the former U.S. attorney, argued that the indictment itself bore a few telltale signs that prosecutors had faced a delay, and that they may have been scrambling to file the charges before the campaign charges hit their 5-year statute of limitations. See now, had Trump won, he could have delayed another year, and then everybody's involved in this scheme hits the statute of limitations and is off the hook. No wonder he wanted to stay in office. 2 counts in the indictment relating to acting as a straw donor and facilitating a contribution by a foreign national, yes, acting, right again, as a straw donor, include a broad time range that in this case extends from September 2016 to July 2017. McQuaid said that while conspiracy charges tend to cover broad time ranges, substantive charges like contributions by a foreign national more typically pin the crime to a specific day or few days. That looks like an effort to squeeze the conduct into the statute of limitations, she noted. But why the delay that had prosecutors potentially bumping up against the statute of limitations? Aaron Klopak, I'm guessing. Aaron Klopak. It's C-H-L-O-P-K. Klopak? Director of Campaign Finance Strategy at the Campaign Legal Center, told TPM that the lack of civil campaign finance enforcement meant that the DOJ had to pick up more of the slack, but also that there was less monitoring of campaign finance disclosures by government authorities. So it's possible that the allegations weren't known to the DOJ until late in the game. Another possibility for delay generally would be a complex case that presented prosecutors with hurdles to investigating the matter, but the Benton and Wade allegations are fairly straightforward. The Russian wired money to Benton, who then reimbursed himself for the $25,000 campaign contribution with that money and kept the rest. Delays often arise when defendants drag out an investigation through plea negotiations, adding time. There are a lot of reasons cases can be stalled, Noble said, but to McQuaid, the timing, along with everything else that the country saw under the Trump administration over the past several years, suggests that something made the prosecutors scramble to file the case before the 5-year limit began to run out this month. The allegations themselves went to the heart of what was under investigation from 2016 onwards. It advances the notion that Russia supported Trump, and we've seen that not only in the Mueller indictments, but elsewhere.
Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Edwards Radio. We actually sort of got to the end of that. I had to kind of cut it off just to fit in before the break there. But yeah, basically the wind-up of the whole article was it advances the notion that Russia supported Trump. And we've seen that not only in the Mueller indictments, the efforts by Russia to support Trump, but here again we have Russia business influence. That was Barb McQuaid's conclusion on the whole article. And, well, what do you know? Turns out that once again, there appears to be some substance to this. Meanwhile, on the other side of the divide, we have news from last week that John Durham, with his weird goatee, was in the middle of attempting to debunk the whole thing and had been at that job for I don't know how long, a couple of years, right? And had been unable to do so up until this point, and I guess is still unable to do so. But exciting his conservative Republican base by announcing that he had an indictment ready to go. Let me roll back to TPM's reporting on this from September 16th, and this one's been languishing a little while longer, to try to fill in the blanks here. Durham grand jury indicts lawyer at DNC-linked firm. A headline, I guess, that one couldn't be avoided, but certainly designed to excite the senses, if you will, and that's what Durham wanted out of this thing. He's got to get a new headshot. He looks ridiculous with his gigantic, floofy goatee and this serious-looking scowl he was putting on for his photo. Anyway, Christina Cabrera and Josh Kovensky on this article too, a grand jury impaneled by John Durham. You do remember who he is, right? Wasn't he the former U.S. attorney in Connecticut, right? Handpicked by Barr to investigate the origins of the FBI's investigation into Trump Russia. And was it trumped up, with a small t, trumped up charges designed to politically damage Donald Trump that were without basis in reality, or something else? So, a grand jury impaneled by John Durham returned an indictment on Thursday against an attorney whose firm has represented the Democratic National Committee. Aha! Right? Well, maybe. The indictment charges Michael Sussman, a cybersecurity attorney at the law firm of Perkins Coie. Is that right? Coie, C-O-I-E, with one count of lying to the FBI over statements he made in September 2016, yes, about since-debunked ties, yes, between the Trump campaign and a Russian bank. One aspect of Trump Russia, I guess. Durham portrays the indictment, a bizarre series of facts alleging that the 2016 Clinton campaign teamed up with an unnamed tech executive to create a narrative regarding Trump. Sussman, Durham says, failed to tell the FBI that he was allegedly acting on the Clinton campaign's behalf. Specifically, Sussman stated, falsely, that he was not doing his work on the aforementioned allegations for any client, which led the FBI general counsel to understand that Sussman was acting as a good citizen, merely passing along information, not as a paid advocate or political operative, the indictment reads. Okay, so I guess Sussman is passing information to the FBI about the links between Trump and a Russian bank. Which Russian bank? I've seen Alpha Bank getting mentions around this story, but I haven't read all the way through it. So I think that's what we're talking about here, but I'm not positive. Down here, well, I can see Alpha Bank already if I scroll down. So I think we're right. The charges. Oh, so I guess just to be clear about this, so Sussman goes to the FBI and says something's going on between Trump and Alpha Bank, and they say, "Well, who are you?" And rather than saying I work for the law, for either for the Clinton campaign or for a law firm that is associated with or working for the Clinton campaign, I'm just a regular concerned citizen. In other words, basically, well, similar to the what's going on here in Loudoun County, people showing up at school board meetings saying, I'm here to protest against masking policy and vaccine policy and critical race theory. I'm just a concerned parent, not at all an RNC operative who happens to live in Loudoun County or anything like that. Okay, so the charges were filed 3 days before the 5-year statute of limitations on the crime was reached. What do you know? That happens on this case as well. The 27-page indictment will serve as a cudgel for Trump and his allies who have long claimed the Russia hoax, in their words, was a Democratic setup. The Durham indictment recites at length alleged contacts between and among Sussman, the Clinton campaign, a tech executive, reporters, and others, attempting to paint a picture of an active Oppo research effort targeting Trump and his Russia ties. Meanwhile, the DOJ is also indicting people for those ties. Durham suggests in the document that the unnamed tech executive may have violated his own company's policy in trying to create what prosecutors describe as a narrative regarding the candidate's ties to Russia. This is a very nebulous indictment. You're being indicted for creating a narrative. The executive, Durham alleges, told his subordinates in August of 2016 to search for any internet data reflecting potential connections or communications between Trump or his associates and Russia. Well, to what extent? Like, when we all heard about this stuff, if you Googled stories about Trump and Russia, is that indictable now? I don't know. I guess it depends on the circumstances, which are no doubt explained more fully in the indictment. The result eventually led to a theory that a Trump Organization server was communicating with one owned by Alpha Bank, which is controlled by a Russian businessman. The unnamed person, I remember the story, the unnamed person exploited his access to non-public data to achieve that, the indictment reads. This appears to be the first instance in which the tech executive has appeared in the saga. I don't remember anybody. The core of Durham's charge relies on Sussman's alleged claim to FBI General Counsel James Baker that he was delivering information about the servers not for any client, but I guess on his own. Durham, while delivering an elaborate narrative involving the tech executive and the Clinton campaign, says that Sussman billed work relating to the server claim, both to the Clinton campaign and the executive, the tech executive. Perkins Coie's relationship with the Democratic Party is widely known. It has served as counsel to the DNC, and Mark Elias, another partner at the firm who has since left, we read his article about electoral reform yesterday, but he used to be a partner at the firm and has since left. At the time, whether he was still there, represented Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign. That's pretty tenuous, but it exists. Durham brings up a cast of characters in alleging the charges. Beyond the tech executive, an unnamed investigative firm hired by Perkins Coie appears in the charging document, as do multiple reporters with various news outlets. I don't know whether they're thinking about what was the name of the outfit that Christopher Steele did work for. For some reason, I'm blanking on it now, but you probably remember. I guess that's who they're thinking of. The indictment documents interactions between reporters and Sussman about the Alpha Bank allegations, and also includes communications between a reporter and the unnamed investigative firm. These discussions feature Sussman and the firm trying to pitch reporters on the server story. The communications took place more than a month after Sussman allegedly lied to the FBI. Durham has been investigating the Trump-Russia investigators for more than 2 years. Until now, his probe has netted a lower-level FBI lawyer. That's about it. But in this case, the FBI itself is the victim of a supposed campaign of deception orchestrated by Sussman while working for the Clinton campaign, which the indictment says ceased to exist after the 2016 election. After the election, Durham says, Sussman started billing the unnamed tech executive. The Washington Post and the New York Times reported on Wednesday that Durham was said to be asking for an indictment against Sussman. Sources told the Post that the special counsel is digging into a theory that Sussman was secretly working on behalf of the Clinton campaign when he reported to FBI lawyer James Baker in 2016 his suspicions of a shady relationship between the Trump organization and a Russian bank. Sussman, wow, he's denied the allegations. Can you believe it? The New York Times report mentioned that Sussman did represent the DNC on cyber issues related to the Russian hacking of the Democratic servers in 2016, but noted that the work Elias and the firm did for the DNC and the Clinton campaign was part of Perkins Coie's political law group, which was separate from the work Sussman was doing. Per the Post and the New York Times, Durham is looking into whether Sussman lied about whether he was working for a client when he went to Baker. Sussman testified to Congress in 2017 that he had gone to Baker as legal counsel to a cybersecurity expert, but sources told the Post and the New York Times that Baker told investigators that he remembered Sussman saying he wasn't working for any client. So it's Baker's memory and or notes, I guess. Sussman's attorneys, Sean Berkowitz and Michael Bosworth, confirmed to the New York Times that they expect their client to be indicted, and I guess now he has been, even though he has committed no crime, in their words. Any prosecution here would be baseless, unprecedented, and unwarranted deviation from the apolitical and principled way in which the Department of Justice is supposed to do its work, the lawyers said. Given Barr's shameless weaponization of the DOJ as Trump's personal law firm throughout his presidency, Durham's investigation has long been suspected to be a politically motivated effort to legitimize Trump and his allies' conspiracy theories that the FBI's Russia probe was a deep state anti-Trump hit job. So, they've got some suspicions about it over at TPM, that's for sure. Now, I also have this piece from MSNBC, and guess what? The byline on this is Barbara McQuade. So that's kind of interesting. She appears on this one, too. Durham's Sussman indictment is a bizarre coda for DOJ's Russia investigation. The Mueller report spells out all the ways in which the Russia investigation was not a hoax. The only hoax is the charge contained in this indictment. This is an opinion piece for MSNBC. Special counsel John Durham was tasked with investigating the origins of the FBI's Russia investigation, and now he appears to have ended his work, and I guess this is it, not with a bang, but with a whimper. It's hard to see how the case Durham filed on Thursday against Washington lawyer Michael Sussman meets Justice Department standards. The indictment alleges that Sussman met with FBI General Counsel Jim Baker, you all know about this, right, to provide information about the connections between Alpha Bank and the Trump organization. The FBI was unable to substantiate any links between the bank and Trump's business, but the charge against Sussman, making false statements to the FBI, doesn't allege that the substance of the information was false, so that's kind of weird. Instead, Sussman is accused of having misrepresented on whose behalf he was providing it. That was the lie. A grand jury only needs to find probable cause that a crime was committed to return an indictment, but DOJ policy requires a higher standard. Before putting a person through the expense, burden, and stigma of criminal charges, a prosecutor should make a determination, quote, that the admissible evidence will probably be sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction. This case comes woefully short of that standard, in McQuaid's opinion. Let's start with the easy one, admissible evidence. The indictment appears to rely on the handwritten notes of an assistant director with whom Baker spoke after his meeting with Sussman. So it's not even Baker's notes. The notes state, among other things, quote, said not doing this for any client. Although, that seems like a reasonably memorable thing. I would make note of it too. Anyone who's played the game telephone understands that as information is repeated, it is often altered along the way. Instead, testimony at trial must be based on personal observation. That's a good point. If the prosecution attempted to offer these notes or even the writer's testimony about what he heard Baker say before he wrote them as evidence, either would likely be ruled hearsay. The case is equally weak on the merits. And you remember at the time when Republicans loved to claim that anything that could be hearsay was, well, not only inadmissible, but certainly should be disregarded even in public trial, if you will. The case is equally weak on the merits. Although making false statements to an FBI agent is a serious crime, the government must be able to prove each and every element of the offense. Here, at least 2 of the 5 elements cannot be met. First, Sussman maintains that he did not make the statement. Many defendants deny misconduct, but this time it may work. In most false statement cases, the precise language of the statement at issue is memorialized in some way. The transcript of testimony under oath, a written submission, or a recorded oral statement. If not, the federal agency will usually provide 2 or more witnesses who personally heard the statement. Here it appears that the whole case is built on the testimony of one witness, Baker. And in a he said, she said face-off, the tie usually goes to the defendant, and this, of course, being a he said face-off. In addition, it is not clear that Baker will be a strong or even willing witness. In a closed-door meeting with Congress in 2018, Baker testified that he did not recall whether Sussman had represented himself as working on behalf of the Democratic Party or Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. Hardly the star witness needed to convict in the absence of all other evidence. Even assuming the prosecution can prove that the statement was false, that Sussman knowingly lied, and that the crime is in the FBI's jurisdiction, it still cannot establish materiality. The materiality element requires a showing that the statement could influence a matter under consideration. Not every false statement is a crime, only those that matter. If Sussman had also bragged to Baker, say, that he runs a 6-minute mile, but in fact he runs a 10-minute mile, that statement might be false, but it would not be material to the matter at issue. Well, this one seems a little closer, but okay. Here, the indictment alleges that Sussman's statement that he was not acting on behalf of any client was material because if the FBI had known that Sussman was providing the information on behalf of the Clinton campaign, it would have treated the information differently. But this allegation is refuted by its own witness. In his 2018 congressional testimony, Baker was asked whether it would have mattered if Sussman had told him he was there on behalf of the Clinton campaign. He said it wouldn't, a devastating admission for Durham's case. What's more, Sussman worked at the Perkins Coie law firm whose representation of the Clinton campaign was publicly known. And based on the assistant director's notes, it appeared that Sussman did tell Baker that he represented the DNC, the Clinton Foundation, etc. So, even if Sussman misrepresented what motivated him to bring the information to the FBI that day, Baker knew that Sussman was aligned with Clinton. if the FBI was going to treat information from Clinton's camp with skepticism, Sussman had provided all the information necessary for the FBI to form that suspicion. For this reason, his allegedly false statement is at worst the equivalent of another 10-minute mile, not material to the matter at issue. Claiming materiality here is particularly galling in light of DOJ's treatment of former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Flynn was charged by Special Counsel Robert Mueller with making false statements when he lied to the FBI about his conversations with Russian ambassador in late 2016. The U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of Columbia, under former Attorney General William Barr, filed a motion to dismiss that indictment on the grounds that Flynn's statement was not material. While materiality generally has a fairly low bar, the different standard that Durham, whom Barr appointed, is holding Sussman, now suggests that he is being treated unfairly. So, why would Durham bother to file charges in a case so rife with issues? The date of the indictment carries one clue. It was filed on the last day of the grand jury's term before the 5-year statute of limitations was set to expire on September 19th. That this case and a prior case against an FBI lawyer for altering an email are the only charges Durham has filed suggests that this is the closest thing he had found to a crime in his search. Another clue about why this case is being filed is the amount of detail contained in the 27-page indictment. It discusses the Clinton campaign's efforts to engage in opposition research on former President Donald Trump, much of it beyond the scope of the very narrow offense with which Sussman is charged. It may be that Durham is using this indictment as a vehicle to disseminate what he has found to the public so that Trump and his allies can paint a false equivalence between the conduct of the Trump and Clinton campaigns. Mueller found that the Trump campaign shared polling data with a Russian intelligence officer, met with Russians to obtain dirt on Clinton, and coordinated messaging around the disclosure of stolen email messages. With this indictment, Trump can now say that it was Clinton who brought information to the FBI about links to Russia in the first place, and yet again claim the Mueller investigation was a hoax. Of course, that points us to the final problem with Durham's investigation. His assignment was to investigate the origins of the Russia investigation. A DOJ Inspector General already found that the investigation opened in July 2016 was properly predicated on information received from a government ally about statements Trump campaign aide George Papadopoulos made, regarding stolen email messages. Any statement made by Sussman months later could not possibly have sparked the Russia investigation. Instead of a quest for justice, the indictment appears to be one more shot fired in the information war. Attorney General Merrick Garland had the power to stop this indictment from being filed and did not do so, perhaps because he believed it to be a valid charge, or maybe because he feared that stopping it would create the appearance that he was acting in furtherance of partisan political interests. While protecting the independence of an institution is a noble cause, it cannot come at the expense of an innocent man being used as a pawn in an ugly political game that will further erode trust in our institutions. The Mueller report spells out all the ways in which the Russia investigation was not a hoax. The only hoax is the charge contained in this indictment. She reiterates at the bottom, and that's the end of that article. So we got all the way through that. So I think we have a pretty good idea now of what's going on with all of this. And we might as well just stick with this. I have one more article about it. Let's see if we distill any new points from this. This piece from The Hill, Barr-Durham investigation again fails to produce a main event, by Dennis Aftergut, an opinion contributor at The Hill. Who is Dennis? Does it say down at the bottom? A former federal prosecutor who has successfully argued before the Supreme Court, currently of counsel at the Renne Public Law Group in San Francisco, RENNE. Okay, let's see what he has to say in the few minutes we have remaining. On September 17th, John Durham, former Attorney General William Barr's designated special counsel, unveiled a molehill that he had made out of a mountain that Barr hired him to build. In May of 2019, Barr appointed Durham, a former U.S. attorney in Connecticut, to investigate the investigators who launched the FBI's Trump-Russia probe. Friday's product of Durham's 2+ years effort had nothing to do with that. Durham indicted former Democratic Party attorney Michael Sussman for false statements to the FBI. Sussman allegedly lied in September of 2016 when he offered the FBI info about the Trump campaign's supposed communications channel to a Russian bank. Sussman allegedly denied, falsely, that he was representing any client in presenting the information. Sussman disputes the charges. Notice that Sussman's alleged lie occurred months after the Trump-Russia investigation began, and is therefore irrelevant to Durham's mission to determine whether the FBI launched its investigation legitimately. The collateral nature of the indictment surpasses even that of Durham's only other product, the August 2020 guilty plea of former FBI agent Kevin Kleinsworth, who admitted altering a June 2017 email that he submitted to the FISA court 11 months after the 2016 FBI investigation began. Make no mistake, however incidental to Durham's charter, these kinds of crimes are serious. Deceiving the FISA court to obtain a wiretap on former Trump advisor Carter Page violated Mr. Page's constitutional rights and undermined the FISA court's credibility and eroded the rule of law. So does lying to the FBI. Without any penalty for false statements to investigators, our law enforcement system unravels. Recall, though, that Michael Flynn pled guilty to Special Counsel Mueller's indictment for such lying. Flynn's falsehood, however, went to the heart of the investigation that Mueller inherited from the FBI. After Trump's win, Flynn lied to agents to cover up the substance of his December 2016 friendly phone conversations with Russia's U.S. ambassador. The exchange looked a lot like part of a quo offered up for a quid of Russia's alleged help for Trump's campaign. In contrast, Sussman's supposed lie was completely peripheral to what Durham was investigating, the 2016 investigation's origin. Though through cascading media interviews, Barr used the Durham inquiry to promote Trump's unfounded claims that he was the victim of a hoax and one of the biggest political scandals in history. In December of 2019, when Michael Horowitz, DOJ's independent inspector general, determined that the FBI, in fact, had a legitimate basis to open its 2016 probe, Barr spun Horowitz's conclusion, saying, "The inspector general's report now makes it clear that the FBI launched an intrusive investigation of a U.S. presidential campaign on the thinnest of suspicions that, in my view, were insufficient to justify the steps taken." Barr called the original investigation completely baseless. He implied that Durham might well reverse the IG's conclusion because Durham could require people to testify, an authority Horowitz lacked. 2 months later, Barr pontificated on Fox News that what happened to Trump was one of the greatest travesties in American history. Without any basis, they started this investigation of his campaign. Justice Department rules disfavor public comment on investigations. Barr raised hard-to-meet expectations and thereby damaged the investigation itself, not to mention the FBI, Justice Department, and the nation. And after 28 months of investigating, Durham has produced nothing to show that the Trump-Russia probe began improperly. Even the prospects for Sussman's conviction are uncertain. His jury must decide whether he lied, and if so, whether it was material. Did it tend to influence how the FBI proceeded? And that, of course, may be difficult because the indictment acknowledges that the FBI was aware at the time of Sussman's work for the Clintons and the Democrats. You know all about that by now. All right. So, while the FBI surely treats political information from someone working for a presidential campaign as less credible than information from a good Samaritan, Sussman apparently did tell the FBI that he represented the Democratic National Committee and the Clinton Foundation, and the FBI decided not to pursue the allegations Sussman brought them. So, expect the defense to argue that Sussman, with an otherwise unblemished record, should not be sent to prison, even if there was a technical failure to disclose. Attorney General Merrick Garland wisely chose not to interfere in a politically fraught matter. We do not know what Durham's investigation may eventually yield, although isn't it over? To date, however, the rose garden that Barr promised Trump and company seems to have sprouted only a couple of thorns. Okay, so there you go. Sounds like it's on pretty shaky ground, and now we have a more thorough understanding of both what happened in indictments over what? An actual connection between Trump and Russian oligarchs and getting money from them, and the allegation from the Trump camp that it would all be proven to be one of the greatest hoaxes ever perpetrated, except we've found no proof of it after 2 years of investigating. Okay, I think that wraps it up on that front, and certainly wraps things up for today. We got to hand the microphone back today. But Justice, with another day off, recovering well, I understand, from his illness. Some alternative programming, therefore, follows, and we'll see if we can't get this together for another crack at it tomorrow.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Might have to get some oxygen tanks in here to make it all the way through 2 hours solo tomorrow, but we'll see what we can do. Don't want to leave you hanging heading into the weekend, and there's a lot more to cover. I really do want to get to this Facebook stuff. That makes a good candidate for a Friday show, if you ask me. We'll see you probably tomorrow. We can't help